Have you ever left a conversation feeling like you said everything and still lost? Like your voice vanished in the noise, and despite trying to stay grounded and clear, you ended up feeling small, like your power got drowned out by someone else's volume? Maybe you've been told that silence is weakness, that if you don't speak up, you're letting others walk all over you. So you explain. You clarify, you defend, louder, longer, yet still feel invisible. But what if silence isn't surrender? What if it's the ultimate form of strength? The Stoics taught that real power doesn't come from reacting. It comes from restraint. Those who speak less, observe more. And when that silence comes from inner mastery, it doesn't echo, it radiates. Not with volume, but with gravity that bends the energy in a room. If that hits home for you, if you resonate with these truths, do me one simple favor, hit subscribe. It truly makes a difference. Now let's go deeper. Reacting quickly doesn't win you the battle. That's where most slip, thinking speed or cleverness wins. But that's just surface. Real wisdom doesn't jump forward. It pauses, breathes, watches. To outsmart someone isn't to outshout them. It's to see the board clearly while they're obsessed with the next move. You give them room to speak, to expose themselves, to stretch too far while you hold position. Not out of passivity, but with precision. That stillness, it isn't empty. It's calculated. It's the discipline to hold fire. It's silence that carries weight, because it doesn't need to prove itself. It commands not through force, but through presence. And it works, because silence rooted in strength unnerves people far more than any argument. In a world drowning in noise, silence feels suspicious, like something's wrong. People mistake it for retreat or loss. But true silence is a stance, control in its purest form. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's the gift of silence. It brings hidden truths to the surface. And while others scramble to read you, they begin to show their hand, their fears, their intentions. Their doubts all start to pour out. People talk most when they feel unsure. Intention, they ramble, repeat, over-explain. Not out of confidence, but out of fear. Fear of being wrong. Of being exposed. Of what might come to light if they stop talking. The noise is an expression. It's protection. Socrates once said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And that's why many hide behind words. Not to reveal truth, but to conceal that they don't know it themselves. There's a strange irony in how people act under pressure. The louder they get, the more you see what they're hiding. Those who can't stop talking, who keep justifying, aren't trying to convince you. They're trying to convince themselves. Plato said it clearly. Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. And you can feel that difference in any room. One person stands still, rooted. The other floats, chasing validation they can't grasp. And when you stay quiet, composed, unaffected, the dynamic shifts. Your stillness becomes their disorientation. Without pushback, they lose their balance. And start to unravel, talking louder, faster. Trying to fill the space you hold. But the silence remains. And that silence reflects what they're trying to bury. Because silence, unlike words, can't lie. It offers no distraction, no script, only a mirror. And that mirror is what rattles them most. Not the lack of noise, but the presence of truth. Raw. Unedited. Unescapable. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But self-knowledge requires stillness. And that stillness terrifies those who avoid their own depth. So they talk. They debate. They distract. Not to engage you, but to escape themselves. If you want to disarm someone, take control by refusing to play. Arguments aren't always about resolution. They're about power. Most people don't want understanding, they want to win. They raise issues to unsettle you. To shift the room. To see if they can pull your strings. And their main tool? Your reaction. They prod your ego, your guilt, your anger. And if you react, they learn where to strike. Every emotional reply is a map to your vulnerabilities. And once they know your fault lines, they press harder. Not louder, but sharper. This is manipulation. And it's rarely obvious, rarely loud. Sometimes it's wrapped in concern, in politeness, in softly crafted phrases. Designed to pull you off balance. But the moment you respond without pause, you've stepped into their territory. So what happens when you don't? What happens when you stay grounded, not just in your voice, but in your entire state of being? No rush of anger. No urge to explain, just a grounded, measured presence. That's when dynamics shift. You're no longer on display, they are. You withhold feedback, and suddenly they're the ones left doubting. They scramble to fill the gap, grasping for the control. That's slowly slipping away. What felt stable for them starts to crumble, because without your response, they're left staring at themselves. No friction. No mirror, no easy road ahead. That's when their game collapses. Their plan counted on your reaction, on you stepping into their pattern. But you don't. And that breaks their strategy. You don't just remove words, you remove the foundation they were leaning against. And now they're reeling. Not even aware that the moment they lost was the one where you chose silence. Silence shakes those who thrive on control. It strips away their tools, their cues, their script. When they can't predict you, they feel unprotected. Not because you've done something aggressive, but because their grip on power is slipping. We fear what we can't explain. And silence, when grounded and conscious, becomes unreadable. That's where discomfort begins. Speech reveals thought, but stillness reveals truth. When you watch without reacting, you become a mirror. And most people aren't ready for their own reflection. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Silence pulls that irritation upward. It's raw, exposed, and it gives them nothing to hide behind. Without your emotional response, they have to face their own tone, their hidden motives, their contradictions. And in that gap, where they expect a push, but receive nothing, they start exposed, unfiltered. Silence, strangely, lets people shout without words. Not in what they say, but how they say it. You hear it in the excess, the need to clarify again, to raise the volume, to sound certain. But that's not truth. That's insecurity, masked as confidence. And the more they try to persuade you, the more they confirm they're not even sure themselves. Plato said, "Truth is the beginning of every good thing." And truth, real truth, doesn't perform. It stands, still and firm, without a need for recognition. In silence, you start seeing through the masks. You notice the split between words and energy, the gap between intent and delivery. You see the act and the strain behind it. And in those moments, clarity arrives. Not just in their message, but in what they're defending. The ego behind the assertion. The doubt behind the posture. The fear hiding beneath the force. That's why the most powerful voices in a room are often the quietest. They're not there to shout. They're there to perceive. They listen, not just to speech, but to pauses, to breaths, to what's left unsaid. They notice posture. They notice rhythm. They notice intent. And while others talk themselves in circles, they absorb, calmly, fully, without interruption. Because why interrupt somebody who's handing you their truth freely? Let them talk. And eventually, they tell you everything. Socrates said, "I know that I am intelligent, because I know that I know nothing." That's not weakness. That's power, humility in its strongest form. It's awareness, stepping back, observing, collecting, understanding. And while they think they're running the game, they're actually playing into your hand. Because you're not on the stage. They are. You're simply watching. There's a different power that rises when you stop reacting. It's not cowardice. It's focus. A quiet clarity that lets you see what others are too busy to notice. When silence isn't emptiness, but presence, the room changes. You stop trying to convince and start understanding. You stop talking and start listening for what's hidden. Truth isn't always in the statement. Sometimes it's in the urge to speak. And when you give people space to spill themselves, they reveal more than they meant to. Silence, when rooted in inner strength, doesn't erase you. It magnifies you. You're not dimming yourself. You're standing so still, so deeply present, that your energy speaks without words. And real control? It's never loud. It's never flashy. It's unmistakable. The room feels it. Carl Jung wrote, "He who looks outside, dreams. He who looks inside, awakes." This awareness, this grounded stillness, is your shield. Once your power comes from within, nothing outside can break it. Think of that person, calm in chaos. Not hiding. Not suppressing. But mastering. Centered. Steady. Present in full. The energy of the room naturally gravitates toward them without trying. The louder voice starts to stumble. The forceful approach begins to shake. Because the pattern they've relied on, push, provoke, challenge, stops working. And in that silence, something strange happens. Their own words begin to return to them. They start to hear themselves, without your interruption. And often what they hear isn't strong, it's fragile. That's when silence turns into a mirror. Not a distorted one, but a clean reflection. And most people don't like what looks back. Plato once said, "The greatest wealth is to live content with little." But in conflict, few are content with less. They want reactions. They want something to push against. It gives them a sense of existence, of control. But when you don't react, when your eyes don't flicker, when your mouth stays closed, they're forced to confront something they've been avoiding. Themselves. And that's where your power lies. Not in defeating them, not in outspeaking them, but in allowing stillness to do the work. Silence wipes away the noise, the masks, the stories. IT doesn't just show them, IT shows you. That you don't need to defend what's already whole. You don't need to argue to keep your center. True control isn't about force. It's about stillness. But let's be clear, silence alone isn't strength. Sometimes it's escape. If you're quiet because you think your voice doesn't matter, or because you're afraid to speak, that's not power. That's abandonment of self. Real silence, the kind that commands a room, comes from choice, not fear. Aristotle said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And that knowing is what splits strategic silence from passive silence. One is decision. The other is hiding. One holds energy. The other leaks it. This silence isn't shyness. It's discipline. It's the silence right before a shift. The gap between trigger and reaction. That changes the entire exchange. This isn't about holding back. It's about holding steady. In the moment you pause, when everything in you wants to strike back, you flip the entire interaction. You're no longer a target. You become the axis. When you stop reacting, you interrupt their script. The pace breaks. The confidence in their voice, it starts to tremble. Their volume now feels forced, masking doubt that's been there the whole time. People expect reaction. They depend on it to navigate. When you don't give it, they're disarmed. That's where real power hides. Not in being silent, but in being unpredictable. And unpredictability, that's always been powerful. It unsettles. It removes the map. And the human mind, when lost, fills in blanks with fears. Doubt swells. Socrates once said, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. That's what this does. Strategic silence pushes people inward. They stop trying to figure you out. They start examining themselves. Their strategy. Their tone. Their why. And in that turn inward, mid-conflict, their power slips away. This is why silence, when used with precision, is so strong. It's not about winning the moment. It's about letting the space tell the story you never had to. So when someone demands a reaction, when they push you to prove or respond, stop. Don't give them what they expect. Sometimes the most powerful response is none at all. Not because you have nothing to say, but because your silence says it all. People aren't shaken by loudness. They're shaken by the unknown. They fear what they can't read. And silence, real silence, becomes a fog they can't navigate. It creates tension. It stirs imagination. And that's the edge. When you reveal little, you force others to invent everything. When they can't predict you, they lose stability. And that's what many conversations secretly seek. Control. If they don't know where you stand, they can't steer you. If they can't steer you, they can't manipulate. And that makes you a threat. Not loud. Not hostile. Just unreadable. And if you stay that way long enough, they forget their script. The hardest person to influence is the one who stays emotionally grounded. Who doesn't blurt. Who doesn't show all their cards. That kind of poise is rare. And unnerving. It's like looking into a blank screen. People start projecting. They begin to see their own fears reflected back. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what if only one reacts? What if the other stays still? Then the change happens to one. And that one, the exposed one, reveals themselves without being provoked. And in that moment, the silent one holds all the power. The truly wise? They're often the ones who speak the least. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer need to say it. They've already seen the ending. They know that speaking too fast can give away what should stay hidden. Every word is a clue, a window into your thinking, your values, your triggers. The wise choose their moments carefully. Plato said it best, wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. The wise don't speak to be heard, they speak to move something. Their words are never knee-jerk, they're deliberate. They're measured, timed, not to impress, but to cut with precision. There's a tactical quiet in listening first, letting others fill the space while you gather intel. Energy, patterns, openings. And when you do speak, it hits, because you don't speak to break silence. You speak to redefine it. Use your words like a blade, not for show, but for strategy. A sharp weapon isn't swung at every slight. It's held until the moment that requires it. Then used with focus, with impact, without doubt. That's how the disciplined handle language. Not for showmanship, but for purpose. They know the cost of empty speech. Every phrase can expose you, invite a challenge, or reveal what should remain guarded. So they wait. They aim. Their silence isn't fear, it's control. And when they do speak, they don't speak to impress. They speak to shape. Real power doesn't speak louder. It speaks less and says more. And sometimes, it says nothing at all. But it's not the silence alone that holds weight. It's what backs it. Silence without substance is invisible. But silence backed by grounded presence, that shifts the atmosphere. Not through force, but through calm, unmoving stability. You don't need to make a scene to shift a room. You just stand in who you are. No need for apologies or performances. And the people around you, they adjust themselves. Not because you told them to, but because your presence spoke first. When someone with true grounding walks in, the room feels it. Before a word is said. That quiet confidence. That rooted stillness. It tells the truth without sound. It says, I know myself. It says, I don't need to take over this room. I am the room. And that kind of silence, it's unignorable. It shifts posture, alters tone, changes the very shape of conversation. Not because you intimidate, but because you exist fully. You don't need volume to be heard. You don't need to fight to be felt. Aristotle taught that character is shown in what you do, not what you say. And presence, real presence, is action without motion. It shows that you've done the inner work, that you're not chasing validation, not lured by ego, not distracted by games. And when your energy speaks louder than your voice, you don't have to defend anything. The boundary is felt. You don't need to state it. People know. Because presence isn't about taking over a conversation. It's about being unmoved by it. It's rootedness. When chaos tries to pull you off center, it's knowing what you stand for and never having to shout it to prove it's real. That kind of energy, it draws people in without trying. Not through charm, but through depth. Not through force, but through unwavering stability. And that kind of presence, it's louder than any voice could be. Socrates once said, "Be as you wish to seem." And that's what presence is. Living in alignment with who you claim to be. No performances. No contradictions. Just calm, steady truth. The kind that doesn't wobble. The kind that doesn't try to dazzle. The kind that simply is. And that speaks before you ever do. That changes rooms without commands. People notice. When you're no longer looking for approval. When you're no longer afraid of being misunderstood. When you're settled in exactly who you are. And that energy, it changes the dynamic. You don't need to assert. Their own noise begins to sound hollow in your presence. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When you've arrived there, when your sense of self is no longer tied to recognition or agreement, your silence starts to roar. And when you finally choose to speak, everything shifts. Because they know your words weren't casual. They weren't a reaction. They were chosen. The silence before them built tension. And the silence after made them echo with power. You don't need to outshout anyone. When one calm sentence carries more weight than 1,000 restless ones. As Plato said, a wise man thinks all he says, but a fool says all he thinks. That's what presence gives you. The restraint to wait, and the impact to make it matter when you do. But how do you become that person whose stillness speaks more than a speech? You learn to sit in discomfort. You stop fleeing from it and begin using it to sharpen your core. You practice holding still when the whole world pushes you to react. When someone misjudges you, when they label you unfairly, when they make assumptions you know aren't true, your ego will want to jump in. It will yearn to correct, to clarify, to be seen in the right light. But true power is found in resisting that urge, in choosing peace over performance. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And when you do know yourself, no misunderstanding can shake you. You don't need to chase approval. You've already found clarity within. That kind of centeredness is rare. And that's why it's so strong. Because when others realize they can't provoke you, that you won't follow their emotional trail, they lose control of the frame. The game ends the moment you refuse to play. When you no longer feel the need to defend. When you let go of the desire to be understood, you become untangleable. That's how manipulators lose. They count on your reaction. They prod, they poke, they press. But when you don't flinch, when you give nothing back, they're left with empty bait. No map, no entry point. And that makes you untenable. So the question becomes, can you stand in stillness while the world demands noise? Can you endure being misread without being moved? Can you trust your truth to stand without defense? Because that's where your real control is born. Not in shouting it, but in resting in it. That kind of stillness, that refusal to chase clarity, is where real strength emerges. Let go of the need to be right, to be exonerated, to be understood. That need isn't power. It's dependence. It's your ego begging for validation, disguised as justification. But when you release it, when you stop asking to be allowed, you step into something stronger. You become the kind of person who no longer needs to prove anything, because who you are already does. And what takes the place of that constant urge to react? Observation. Patient, grounded awareness. You don't freeze. You think. You let stillness become strategy. Not passive, but precise. You see the whole board while others chase pieces. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." When you stop reacting, you start reading. Not just actions, but intentions. You begin to see the masks behind the movements, the ego behind the assertions. You hear the nerves in their certainty, the desperation in their repeats, the fear in their force. Plato said, "Truth is the beginning of every good thing." And real truth? It doesn't fight for validation. It doesn't argue its place. It simply is. So when you see someone trying too hard to be believed, to sound right, you know the truth already speaks for itself. So what do you do in that moment? Nothing. You don't cut them down. You don't outperform. You hold the silence and let them unravel inside it. Every word they throw out becomes a map to their fears. Their own noise becomes the evidence of their unsteadiness. You just give them room, and they fill it. Their argument collapses, not because you destroyed it, but because it couldn't hold itself up. You never engaged, and you still won. How? By refusing to play. You don't outtalk them. You outlast them. You let their emotion burn out until the truth stands clear. Their contradictions, their weak points, they expose themselves. And you stay still. You win by revealing nothing. But here's where people get it wrong. Silence alone isn't power. If you're quiet because you think you're small, because you've been trained to shrink, then your silence is a cage. It doesn't protect. It contains. And in time, it turns to resentment. The kind that festers and fractures you inside. True silence is a choice. It's built on self-knowledge, not fear. It doesn't shrink you. It elevates you. It becomes a peace that even chaos can't shake. But when it's rooted in fear, it steals your voice. before you ever use it. That kind of silence doesn't empower. It erases. So if you're going to be quiet, make sure it's your decision, not your conditioning. How do you know the difference? Intention. If your stillness feels calm, focused, alert, you're holding a shield. If it feels heavy, like hiding, like shrinking, you're holding a cage. Socrates said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new." Silence, when used wisely, builds. It creates room to grow. But when used to escape, it becomes a wall. In a world that never stops talking, your silence can be your greatest voice. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to justify to be real. Stand still. Be grounded. Let the world adjust to your energy. And if this message struck something in you, there's another video waiting, ready to take you further. Watch that next. Thank you for spending this time with Stoic Journal. Your presence means more than you know. And always remember, real strength isn't in the volume of your voice. It's in the depth of your listening. We'll see you back here soon.